Hey, thanks for tuning in and welcome to Fired Up. I'm Bob Irwin. I'll be your host for this show. I'm from the gun store in Las Vegas. This program is about guns, politics, and self-defense and those things related thereto. Each week we'll have a panel on to discuss various firearms issues that are important to gun owners. This week's panel includes my co-host, Emily Miller from the gun store. We have Alan Butel, a criminal defense attorney here in Las Vegas. We have Mike Rogers, who's a firearms instructor for the last 30 years or plus, more.
First one was a flintlock.
And and we have retired LVMPD Lieutenant Randy Sutton, who's written several books on policing and is a well-known guy in his own right here in Las Vegas. This segment, we're going to be discussing a shooting case that it took place in Great Bend Township, Pennsylvania, almost 2 years ago now. It's an interesting case that is either a murder case, multiple murder case, or possibly self-defense. And what I'd like to do is explain to the viewers what basically happened in the case and then have the panel discuss what's going on. In this Great Bend Township in Pennsylvania, we had a 45-year-old resident by the last name of Thomas who shot and killed two men, a 30-year-old fellow named last name Rogers and a 28-year-old last name Alvarez. The circumstances were this. Rogers had told his girlfriend that they lived nearby that someone had put a bullet hole in his black Ford Mustang. He's a car guy. I know, Randy, it'll upset you that somebody shot a black Ford Mustang, but
it does, it hurts me.
That's why you're on the panel for today's show.
You can go now.
Thomas claimed that the car was parked in a position in front of his house when the two of them went fishing, the two men, and when he came back, there was a bullet hole in his car. So he went home and got his friend Alvarez, and they decided they would go to Thomas's house and somehow clear up this shooting the bullet hole in his car. From then on, it got much more complicated. We end up with both Rogers and Alvarez dead. We end up with Thomas in jail for murder, claiming self-defense. What basically happened is they came back to his house. Alvarez went to the back door. The other gentleman, Rogers, went to the front door, went toward the front door. There were shots fired, and both of them were killed. First thing I want to look at in this case is the fact that they went over to this guy's house seeking, I guess, revenge. And Emily, I'm going to throw that one to you, that here you have your boyfriend, living together for years, decides to go to a neighbor's house to get revenge for a bullet hole in his car. What do you do when he tells you that, or if he tells you?
Well, I mean, does he say, honey, I'm going to go seek revenge on the possible bullet hole in my car? I mean, if he says that changes things. But if he's just going to say, oh, I'm going to go approach this guy or question him, I guess it would determine, my actions would be determined by how angry he was when he left. I mean, it's easy to say she should call 911 if he says, I'm going to go and shoot this guy because I think he did this to my car. But obviously, it's more menacing because one approaches from the front door and one approaches from the back door. So I guess I would want to know how much she was informed of his intentions for kind of confronting this guy and saying, hey, did you do this? Or in his mindset, he's like, he did it, I'm going to go get revenge. I feel like if she knew that, then obviously she would need to intervene and say something.
If she knew that, she's possibly an accessory to a murder.
Absolutely.
For not calling the police. Mike, you teach people self-defense all the time. You've got your students sitting in a house, a guy comes to the front door and back door, he doesn't know either individual, he shoots them both dead?
You look at the elements there, and on the surface it would appear that they had the ability. Apparently they came armed. There was a weapon found at the scene. They had opportunity. The one gentleman, Alvarez, that was killed was less than 20 feet from the front door when he died, when he expired. That's where they found the body. And obviously, if they went to two different entrances, one could feel menaced at that point. The police report also said they blocked the exit at the road where he could get out.
Their car
Yeah.
was parked.
On the little amount that's been presented as evidence in there, on that you could say when your dogs start barking and you see people approaching in that manner, especially if he knew them prior. That's what I don't see has been established, is what their relationship was prior to the shooting. Were they customers of each other? Was there other things
Apparently,
going on?
they didn't know each other.
That's
other
what
than-
was made apparent, but it's one wonders. It's a very small town,
So,
and they'd been on that street earlier in the day. It was they did return to that.
on the face of it, a good shoot, self-defense.
At that amount of evidence presentation, yeah, I think would say you'd have a reason to say you were menaced in your home.
Randy Sutton, the police arrive. You have a dead body in front. You have a dead body on the side of the house. The guy at that point had left. He walked away. When the police arrive, he comes walking back down the road with his rifle and his pistol in his hand. What do you do?
Well, there's going to have to be, of course, a forensic exam of all the evidence there. They're going to have to gather the information that they can, and of course, with the two dead people, they can't tell the story. So the only guy that can tell the story is the shooter. They asked him about the incident, and the only thing basically that he said was that he was in fear and he did what he had to do to defend himself. Without giving any other details, without telling the police about what took place, and the police not having anything else to go on other than two dead bodies and a shooter, the guy's going to jail, and the district attorney is going to be making those decisions, because without having more information about, as Mike said, you know, what past relationships existed, what kind of story about the self-defense is coherent and would be consistent with what was found forensically. And at this point, I mean, I would, if I was making the decision, I don't think the police have any choice but to make an arrest and then let the district attorney office make the decision.
I'd agree with you. There was one thing we left out here is the guy in the front yard had taken a wound on his hand that also hit the shotgun that he was carrying. They found next to the body.
Right.
So they had pretty good evidence that the guy was carrying a shotgun at the time he was fired on. The second guy, they didn't find the gun right away, and there may never be a gun. They didn't find, he may not have been armed, but he was at the back of the house. So the defense is being made in this case. We're going to get way more into this in our next segment, but the defense, Alan, is being made in this case of the Castle Doctrine in Pennsylvania, that he was in his home and he was in fear because these guys came to the front and back door. Therefore, he has a right to fire. We have a similar statute here in Nevada. You're not required to retreat, certainly, from your home. This guy defensible? Does this look like a murder so far? We're going to get.
It's a great case. As a defense attorney, it's a great case. But there's some things you're going to have to explain. As Randy had indicated, you have to have a coherent story or a theory of your case that's going to explain to the jury. What you're going to have to do is expand that Castle Doctrine outside of the four walls of your home, out onto the property, because there's a couple of facts that I think that are involved that are important. One is, I believe it was Rogers, was found approximately 70 feet from his car, between the house and the car, quite a distance away from the house, dead. And it's my understanding this is a wooded area. There was a steep incline to get onto the property. So while it does appear that the two ex-Army buddies were there armed to do something nefarious, justifying what happened for Mr. Thomas, you know, in that sense, it also appears that Mr. Thomas somehow, with his .45 caliber handgun and his .22 caliber rifle, was doing some hunting. And I think it all comes down to timing.
Who was hunting who?
Who was hunting whom?
We've got a break for a couple of messages. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Hey, we are back here on Fired Up. Thanks for watching the sales pitches. There's a little more involved here that I'm going to explain now as we're starting to get control of this case. The shooter, his father at one point owned an actual gun shop in this same area in the town. They have a little shooting range on their property. The father retired years ago, 2010. The store went broke and the father moved away, but the son is still living in the house. He has lots and lots of guns. He has been known by rumors that he thinks he owns the road in front of the house, and he occasionally shoots at people who are driving through what he believes is his road. So he's not perhaps the most level-headed guy here. Back to the self-defense, Mike. Nobody's actually entered the house. He just begins firing because they're on the property. Not something you normally teach, I assume. We're not.
We don't have an expanded castle doctrine in Nevada. No, that's exactly right. But at what point did he feel threatened in fear of his life or great bodily injury? And that's what we can't determine because the only other two witnesses are deceased.
If he sees one guy with a gun, he kills. I understand. Okay, if a guy's coming at me with a gun, like clearly that's self-defense. I'm in fear for my life. But what does that say that he's allowed to shoot the second guy?
They're
if he doesn't see
working
a gun?
in concert to present a threat. Would a reasonable person in his circumstances, knowing what he knew at the time, have felt the same level of threat from both
How does
people?
the guy end up so far away from the house it's laying 70 feet from the Mustang, though?
After he's shot, he
After
runs
he's
for
shot
a while.
in the back.
That happens all the time. He's not going to necessarily drop.
He crawls there, or
Crawls part of the way,
Runs.
runs part of the way.
It isn't like television. When an individual is struck in a gunfight, very often they're on adrenaline.
Still
they're,
mobile?
They're pumped up, and they don't die instantly unless there's a truly a fatal shot fired. So you can run out and run away, bleed out, and it can take minutes.
So the question becomes one of is this, and we're not going to be experts on the castle doctrine law in Pennsylvania, but in the look at reasonableness, was not this guy in reasonable fear? We've got two guys he supposedly doesn't know, and even if he knows them, and he's got one at the back door, one at the front door, at least the one in the front he can see is armed. We know that because one of his bullets hit the shotgun. So would not that clearly give him...
This is not grandma sitting around in her house and, oh my God, there's somebody at the back door, honey. This is a guy who's got guns all over the place. He apparently, from what you say, regularly shoots at people driving on his
on occasion,
road.
anyway.
And he apparently, to me, I'm concerned about his laying in wait. There's something about this that stinks.
Looking for trouble.
Looking for trouble.
Yeah.
Makes no effort to call anybody. Of course, the brain surgeon that drove over there before he called in his insurance agent, that he's not too bright either. But
Kind of goes under looking for trouble when you go back
I
to the
just wonder
spot
who's
you
going to
already
be playing
been
the
shot at.
banjo at this trial.
It's small town.
Yeah.
It may well be several people, but
And this is where, when we talk about the collection of forensic evidence, what was the position of the people who were shot and the shooter? I mean, if he's claiming that he's defending his house, is it possible that he knew they were coming and he was waiting for them in ambush? There's a possibility here. Since we're working with limited facts and he's not telling the story, then you have to look at the totality of the circumstances, and if you can't come up with a coherent reason for him doing what he did, then you have to make the charge.
Which one of the guy gets hit in the temple?
the guy at the back door, Alvarez.
The unarmed guy.
Or probably unarmed. They never did find a gun, but there's guns all over the place inside the house. Mm-hmm. So we have, and this guy is not talking. He got his attorney. He has made some statements that he felt he was in, he made statements that are right out of the law books. I was in fear of my life, therefore I fired because I was afraid I was going to die. That's it.
And then he lawyered up.
and then he lawyered up. So
But everything points to the fact that they had some previous relationship. They had met each other. I mean, they went looking for him knowing he was the bullet hole guy.
I'd be willing to bet on that one.
Yeah.
They knew each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Very small town.
We'll give you that. They knew each other, but what difference does it make in the case? So he knew
knows
the
the
guys
guys.
that were at the back in front of his house and were blocking his escape with
Well,
their
They
car in
did
the middle of the
evidence,
road.
The reason that it's germane is that if there were if that relationship included threats, then it could either bolster his case, or it could, if he had been making threats to them, then it could be a different set of circumstances. So, these are the unknowns, but that's what the relationship is. That's why the relationships that these people had towards each other is so important to trying to make a determination about.
But the problem is these guys are invading his property.
Two guys come to your house that you know don't like you. You're going to shoot them a lot quicker than two strangers who you're not quite sure.
These
You
guys
know
are
they hate you.
invading his castle, his property. That's a biggie.
And they went there intentionally with guns. I don't see how you're going to get around that. Whether he's realistically in fear, I certainly think you can sell that to a jury.
I do too.
And he probably did shoot the bullet hole in a truck, but that's not a capital offense even in Pennsylvania, unless it's a really cool Ford. Then it goes different. But I can't see that happening. We're going to have to break for a minute. We'll be right back. We are back here on Fired Up. We're going to try and get some opinions on this case. One of the things we're talking about on the break is there were shell casings everywhere because this the shooter that was a gun shop at one time. There's a shooting range on the property. He shoots all the time. Probably shoots off his front porch all the time. So I'm looking at this myself and going, well, this is pretty stupid not to call the police, or he couldn't run. I understand the guy at the back door blocked that. So he ends up firing, but nobody had actually entered his house. And they didn't fire through this whole thing. The guy at the back door may or may not have been armed, apparently not. That seems unusual because everybody in the area owns a gun or two or 3 or 5. But so as a defense lawyer, you're going to look at this guy from his perspective and go, valid shoot.
Without knowing all of the little infinitesimal details that could make a difference cumulatively, I would say the two Army buddies picked the wrong guy to mess with. They went to his property, they invaded his space, and this is a good shoot. There's a few things I don't like about it, but overall, that's it.
Well, there never, in my opinion, there never is a shooting that's perfect. There's always something goofy with it that happened that we don't expect to have happen, that somebody acted irrationally. The people, if you've noticed doing these shows over time, that the people involved in these are not always rocket scientists.
Absolutely.
And they're acting on emotion, he probably is acting on bare fear that made absolutely no sense. Why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you?
Well, this is where the doctrine of the reasonable person has to come in. What's a reasonable person going to be thinking under these sets of circumstances? And the problem lies in that you don't know what he's thinking because he won't tell you. So that causes an issue. And also, in my mind, even though he has the right to remain silent, generally speaking, innocent people don't remain silent. Innocent people tell their story.
Yeah, Michael, let me address this. I mean, wouldn't
Don't
this
look at
be
me
a
like an
good
attorney.
spot for him to have yelled a warning at them?
Do we know that he didn't?
Get up? Well, no, we don't.
Because he stopped his statement at the point that said he was
Or his
in
warning
fear
shot
of his
was
life.
the one that hit the guy in the
He
head with
warned,
the first round.
warned the first guy, and the second guy ran, and then I don't know, there's not enough evidence.
This is a warning. Your friend drops dead from a gunshot wound?
That's a pretty good warning. He's hightailing it back to the car.
Well,
And he
apparently
gets shot in the back.
Apparently was turning and got shot in the back. The round that hit his shotgun apparently hit in the front, but he turned after that, or there were multiple shots fired at him. And that we can't tell either because of the shell casings everywhere. So what do? We tell the guy, well, he's in this real case, the gentleman is supposed to go on trial. This has been over 2 years and he's supposed to go on trial within the next month or so. And we'll pick this up when it shows up again and see what they really do. They may drop the charges against him altogether. That's what his attorney wants him to do on a prima facie case of self-defense. The two guys that went over to the house to defend their car,
I think he knew him, and they just decided they poked the crazy bear. Trigger happy, he was looking for a fight, and I think that this could have gone a lot differently if they had just pumped the brakes and maybe not gone over and tried to ambush him with guns. I don't know.
Did President Obama weigh in on this one at all, you know?
not yet. If they're going over to murder him, why would they park their car right in front of his house?
To block the exit,
To block the exit, but he knows they're coming.
which is another case for defense in that case.
We'll be back the next episode very shortly. We're back for our little wrap up here. I should explain further, he hasn't had his criminal trial yet, but there is a civil suit in process for financial damages for a couple $100,000 from the dead guys' families. They're trying to get that case done before the criminal case goes to court in case the criminal case is dismissed on self-defense grounds, castle doctrine defense. They'll already have the money from the civil suit, they think, but nobody ever gets paid that fast, so that isn't really going to happen either. So where are we going to leave this one? Is he going to jail more, or is he going to walk away, Mr.
Well, he
Rogers?
was in for a long time before they let him make bail, months and months. On the face of it, he's going to walk unless new evidence is presented or it's presented in a different manner, because there's no reason to, beyond a reasonable doubt, question the fact that self-defense could have been a factor. And that's
So
all
you
he
kill
needs
all
to
the
walk.
witnesses, you're going to be found
Absolutely,
not guilty.
good technique.
Emily?
If two guys come to my door, front and back, and one of them has a gun, that's self-defense.
I could see one variation of that. Not guilty for the guy next to the house, but guilty on the guy that's shot in the back and laying close to the car.
Could well be.
That may be a problem.
It could well be. We're assuming they're both going the same way, but not necessarily. The guy at the back of the house, he's got a lot more cause. It's closer, trying to get in.
I
Randy?
was, being that the great minds think alike, Alan and I thought about the same thing. The guy with the gun, you're going to have a tough time explaining how he's not, making aggressive actions towards the shooter. But the guy that's not armed, he's going to have some more explaining to do.
And he's the one that's more
But he's the
adjacent
guy
to the
closer
house.
that's at the back door.
We'll see.
Thanks for listening. We're going to be back with another episode right away. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Welcome back to Fired Up. I'm Bob Irwin, your host for the show. We're with the gun store in Las Vegas, Nevada. This program is about guns, politics, and self-defense. And each week in this time slot, we will bring you a panel discussion format on firearms issues that are important to gun owners. This week's panel is my co-host, Emily Miller, who's the marketing and wedding manager for the gun store. We have a wedding chapel on board here. To my left, criminal defense attorney Alan Butel, who works here in Las Vegas defending all sorts of ne'er-do-wells who probably shouldn't be walking around. One of our firearms instructors, Mike Rogers, well-experienced gentleman in teaching, and retired local police department lieutenant and author, Randy Sutton. We're going to talk a little bit tonight on this episode, about having the choice to keep a gun in your home for self-defense. I am personally a staunch believer in that everybody should have the ability to defend themselves in their home. And truthfully, that if you don't keep a gun in your house, if you're capable of having a gun in your house, that you are choosing in advance to be a victim before anybody even shows up at your door. There are a lot of issues with some of the political people about people owning guns and having them in their house and accidents and so forth. And we're going to talk about that for the next few minutes, the good and the bad. First, I want to give the floor to Emily. When I talk about everybody should have a gun in their house, the downside certainly could be that some child finds the gun, or there's a irresponsible adult there that gets a hold of the gun. We see those in the paper from time to time.
Yeah.
What's the way around that? How do we keep a gun without it becoming a more of a danger to the residents than the intruders?
Well, we have guns in our home, and it's my firm belief that it is 100% preventable. Keeping guns out of kids' hands or irresponsible adults, get a proper gun safe or gun lock or whatever is conducive to your home environment. If there's no children around and it's something where you want to just have it in a locked drawer or a hand, safe where you scanned your hand or a number code, I think it's 100% preventable. Ours are located in a gun safe that is readily accessible. If kids come to our house, there is zero chance that they will find the guns, get to them, or even if they find the safe, be able to access it at any point. So it's heartbreaking when I hear about these accidents where it was stored someplace or they forgot where they put the gun. I think it's 100% preventable with proper gun safety and knowledge.
We've had a number of those locally, and of course
Yeah.
some that made huge news nationally. And I always wonder what the owner was thinking when he left the gun sitting in an unlocked drawer and kids run around the house. They will find your gun. We've discussed that when you were a child of 6 or 7 or 8, you never got a present on Christmas that you didn't know was coming, because as soon as your parents leave the house, you search everything that they own. This theory that my kids wouldn't do that. Kids
They're curious.
do that.
They get in cabinets, they draw on walls. That's what they do, but you got to keep them safe.
So you have a gun safe, you have gun locks
Yeah.
and so forth and so on. We've been giving away gun locks here for years. The police departments give them away. The Red Cross gives away gun locks. There's really no excuse other than I forgot. It's kind of like I forgot and left my baby in the car when it's 100 degrees outside. Can't leave the gun.
I just don't think I would ever not know where a gun is in my home. I feel like that's like I'm gonna find the cats. Like I know where those are. Like I know where the guns are in the house. I just feel like that's a cop out for people to say, oh, I didn't remember it was in the kitchen
Yeah.
drawer or something. That doesn't make sense.
This is a really common thing. We've got some research available now that tells us in the last year they kept the stats, which was 2010, that civilians in the United States fire their guns about 75,000 times a year. 75,000 cases a year where somebody breaks in or is intruding on a house where the homeowner actually fires at him. They also hit about 7,500 criminals. That's about the shooting ratio we get with police departments. Has to do with a lot of things, stress and so forth, but that's the next important thing. If you're going to have a gun in your house, it has to be secure, so only you can get it or responsible people can get to it. And Michael, they have to be able to hit. It doesn't do a lot of good if the guy breaks in and you fire 3 rounds and don't hit him.
Yeah, it's pretty
Does it?
obvious. People think they're protecting themselves by purchasing a gun. That's just the start of the thing. First, they have to accept the fact that it can happen to them, which they've marginally done before they bought the gun, but they think the gun's going to take over the job, and they're going to ignore the fact that it takes a lot of training to become even marginally proficient. Police officers train a lot, some more than others, and the difficulty is well proven because of the stress factor. If people don't take the effort to make modern training available to them, they're really fooling themselves about their ability to protect themselves.
And we're dealing with lots of repetitions and what we
Repetition's
call muscle
key.
memory, which
Yeah.
muscles really don't remember, but your brain does.
Yeah, I think the neuroscience people call them neural pathways now, but it's the same idea. Repetition's the key to any complex task. And visualization is the other side of it. You have to see it happening to you. You have to visualize the premises that you're in your own home and the worst situation that can happen. What would I do in that situation? You have to say, what am I going to do with the kids? They have to be part of the plan. Just like doing a fire plan, which most people don't either. They buy a fire extinguisher and never recharge it. You have a plan with your family, with your kids, whether you're on the street, whether you're in your home. What do we do if, and then you practice it. And when you don't do that, then you're pretty much ignoring all the possibilities. You're
Because you're
setting
gonna
yourself
go
up
into
to be a
brain
victim.
warp when somebody's actually there.
Absolutely. You have to have that preconceived and pre-visualized, or you're just going to lock up.
We've seen cases where people don't practice with a gun. Even people, we had an employee here that carried a 1911 and he carried it cocked and locked, which is with the safety on, which you have to flip it off with your thumb as you draw the gun. And we did a surprise drill on everybody one day, stuck them in the range, come as you are party. There's 2 targets down range. When you hear the beeper in your ear, fire 1 round into each target. Should take less than 2 seconds. And this one guy who's retired from state police in an East Coast city, East Coast state, drew his gun and nothing happened. And he pulled the trigger several times and realized he had forgotten to take off the safety and been carrying that gun for 35 years. And just the stress of, you know, all we did to them if they failed the course was don't let them carry their gun for a day, which embarrasses them in front of all the other employees. But I want to get something else. This is probably going to take us beyond the break, Randy, and you've seen this before, that people need the will to actually use their gun when danger threatens. Some people lock up and they don't, they freeze, they don't fire.
Well, we're talking about the human experience now. We can try and narrow this conversation down to the half hour that we have, but there's so many complexities here. And when you're dealing with human beings, every single one of them is different. They are all products of their environment, of their training, of their mindset. And if you consciously make the decision that you're going to be a firearms owner, as Mike said, the job just starts there. Now you have to prepare yourself. And one of the things that we teach in law enforcement, and I found it actually, I believe it saved my life during one of the gunfights that I was in, was a mental exercise called crisis rehearsal. And that is where I envisioned in my mind, as part of my training, all kinds of scenarios. And in each of the scenarios that I was involved in a shooting in my mind, I would emerge victorious. And that, I believe, is an essential part of the survival of a human being when they are in mortal danger. But it happens before the incident. Otherwise, you're gambling, and that's a bet that I don't want to take.
You've seen an officer on occasion, I have, where they simply lock up, where several officers will fire at something that appears to be a threat and one of them doesn't. He just simply can't press the trigger when it comes down to that.
Right.
And nobody knows if you're going to be one of those guys until you end up in this situation.
And in fact, I've witnessed that on more than one occasion, that you can train an individual, and in the classroom and on the range, they can be Andy Oakley, but they don't have the mental acuteness during that one moment when they face the dragon that they could act. And some people simply cannot, because of their religious beliefs, because of the way they were brought up, cannot bring themselves to take the life of another human being.
We're going to break right here. We have to do a couple commercials. There's a lot more to this, as Randy Sutton said. We'll be right back. We're back. I'm going to give our resident defense lawyer here, Alan Butel, a little bit to. This is such an involved subject. We're going to do part of this on several other shows. I think we're going to have to. But the legal ramifications of using deadly force obviously are severe. And we have criminal cases against people. We have civil cases against people, civil lawsuits. Briefly, what are they looking at?
From soup to nuts here.
Briefly, yes.
As briefly as I can. First of all, do a personal inventory and decide whether you have the mental abilities, the mental acuity, the sobriety, the reliability to keep a firearm in your home. Train yourself to use it. so that when and if, God forbid, you're ever confronted with a situation that you do take another human life, you will be able to testify on your own behalf. In the criminal case, if need be, and certainly, almost undoubtedly, in the civil case that will follow. When you use your firearm, the police are going to be involved, there's going to be district attorneys involved, there's going to be your attorney that's involved, and you're going to be sued. So the first thing that you need to do is to prepare for that eventuality. Make sure that you know how to use your firearm, that you're not just, you know, some cowboy shooting willy-nilly, taking out the neighbors. You know what I'm saying?
You get to buy everything you hit?
Yeah, there's like one of your good friends and a colleague of mine, there's an attorney attached to every bullet that is shot out of that gun. So, I mean, this is a very comprehensive subject, and everything that Mike and Emily and Randy has stated about preparing yourself ultimately helps when you are confronted with the legal ramifications of using the firearm.
That's the hardest part. I look at most of the gun magazines will have stories in them about home defense shootings where they'll say, you know, Mrs. McGillicuddy was sitting in her house and a guy broke through the front door and was trying to stab her with whatever, and she picked up her pistol and shot the guy, and the police came and they didn't arrest Mrs. McCurdy. In fact, they gave her a new bullet and she went on home. And that scenario basically never happens. Where the investigation literally is 3 minutes and no lawsuit comes and they don't even come in to mop up the blood. These tend to be really life-changing events. You'll do nothing but this shooting for the next 2 years at least.
The law protects us. It protects us when there's a homicide. Anytime somebody's dead, there's a homicide. Whether it's justifiable, whether it's self-defense, that's the question.
Somebody's going to look into it.
And what these people have said, what I've said, what you say all the time, prepare, prepare, prepare. That is where you will ultimately benefit yourself if, God forbid, you have to use the firearm.
When it happens, are you going to know how to shoot, when
Absolutely.
to shoot?
Because it isn't just it isn't just the person that you're shooting at. I mean, you got a likelihood of this happening in an urban environment, since we live in Las Vegas. A likelihood of it happening next door to somebody that you know. A likelihood that the bullet is going to go through several walls,
Right.
windows, what have you. Likelihood that you're going to spray bullets, because when you're all nervous and such, you're probably shooting as many rounds as you have in your firearm.
Generally, people do.
And that's probably at least 6. So here we go. There's bullets flying everywhere, and that's why training helps.
When that person maybe remembers 1 or 2 trigger pulls.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, they don't even remember. They just black out, from what my understanding.
Well,
from reading
that's
it.
a
Very
constant.
individual.
You will be the worst witness to your own shooting, because you simply go into brain warp. If your life is in danger and you really feel you're going to die, that's one of the tricks I've used once in a while to try and get an idea in shooting cases that I've worked on, is if the guy walks up to me and says, I fired 9 rounds, my immediate reaction is he wasn't really afraid he was going to die. Because if he was, he wouldn't know that. He would have known his gun ran out of bullets, but not why.
There's one thing to add to this topic that we haven't mentioned. For those people who don't have all of the necessary components to prepare for this, there's always less than lethal force that they can introduce into their home to protect themselves and their family that will do a lot more if they're comfortable using that, instead of, you know, being afraid of using their gun.
There is, you know, and we'll do a show on that in the very near future about what's available, that especially we've done that in gun sales where the person really isn't comfortable with a gun and we don't feel they're going to be comfortable with a gun. You can get some stuff that's less lethal, various tasers and pepper sprays and so forth that work very, very well in most cases. Not every case, most cases.
You should
But
have an alternative, absolutely.
They're certainly better than nothing at all.
You just have to know when to do it. I think the biggest problem that most people don't confront is defining their own role in society. And in the more advanced level classes we do, you break it down to who am I willing to die for? And if so, is that a person that I would kill for? Who else would be included in that group? What level of threat do they have to be under before I would use deadly force? When you break it down like that, I got a pretty narrow spectrum. You guys are pretty much on your own. You should have brought your own gun. And if people would think a little more like that, it would define their goals a lot better. And you have to define those things. What's important.
We are back. What we just got there at the end is one of the most interesting parts of using a firearm for self-defense. The gun mechanically works almost every time, but the people handling them don't work every time. I
have a family member who obviously knows that I'm in the firearms industry, and she told me, she said, I am not a good candidate as a gun owner. I don't want to own a gun. She was in a situation one time where she had to escape very quickly, and it was a door with the lock on the knob and then the deadbolt and the whole thing. She was getting them backwards, and she would lock it and unlock it, and then she kept getting herself trapped in, and she realized in that moment, I'm not one that works well under pressure. Now, is my gun loaded? Is the safety on? Is it, am I aiming at the right person? I mean, she just doesn't feel comfortable that under pressure, when it really came down to it, that she could efficiently, work a firearm to defend herself. They'd take the gun from her and turn it on her before she would ever get a chance to do anything.
But that, as a firearms trainer, can be fixed.
Absolutely.
And it's fixed with more and more and more practice. So you do the same thing, the same thing, the same thing. I had a couple of police cadets, I've had a lot of police cadets over the years teaching academies, but one of the drills we always do is I always have them standing about 3 feet from the target and make them simply draw and fire 2 rounds. And we do it over and over and over from their triple retention holster that nobody can get it out of and all that sort of thing, over and over. And there was a shotgun fight in a jurisdiction nearby here where one of those guys was one of mine. The other one had trained at a different academy where they taught more long-range shooting and probably taught better techniques, I don't know. But when it came down to it and their opponent came up with a gun, the student from the other academy drew his 1911. He got 5 shots off, one of which hit the suspect in the top of the shoulder going downward. The guy was already falling forward because the guy I taught that rote thing to went boop and hit the guy twice right in the center of the chest, and that was the end of the fight. And he didn't think about that. He just did it. And that's not my training, but that's just to tell you, if you practice that over and over again, you will do that in real life. When you go brain dead because there's a guy there with a machete, you're going to do what you've practiced without thinking. And I hate to say you shoot without thinking, but you almost have to shoot without thinking. It has to be wound in to your brain that that's what you're going to do.
Your brain's a pretty marvelous organism, and if you let the different facets of it organize themselves the way they're designed to, you can take a complex task like shooting a gun, and that's in the motor cortex, and the intellectual parts and others, so you can be making all of those intellectual decisions. Is this a shoot or a no-shoot decision if your body has mastered the mechanical part of it in the cortex? And it's just a matter, first you have to make the commitment that you're going to do it. It can happen to me. I don't want it to happen to me or my family, so I'm going to make the effort to train to try to prevent that. Anything less than that's fooling yourself.
Have to.
Bear Bryant once said, everyone has the will to win. That's easy. He says, few people have the will to prepare to win.
The will to practice.
Well said.
Yeah, that's real life, and I'm sure you've seen that in shooters that you have been involved with in the street.
And we're talking a lot about a very sensitive topic to a lot of people, maybe some of the viewers here. And when it really comes down to it, you have to make the decision. And there's a saying in police work: it's better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6.
I think it was General Grant that said something about that the best decision carried out too late is worthless. The second best decision carried out immediately and forcefully wins the day. So we're going to break for a little bit. We'll be right back. We are back here on Fired Up. We're going to close up this segment with maybe a little more heartfelt advice from the people on this panel as to your thinking about your own self-preservation and how to keep your family safe. Have a firearm. If you don't have a firearm, you have decided in advance whatever the bad guy wants to do to you and your family, they're going to do it. You can't be in that position. You have to be capable of defending yourself. Michael?
Absolutely. It's the prime imperative of any male animal is to protect its family, its breed. And the best tool to do that we have available to us is a handgun. If you're going to keep it in the home, you have to be responsible with it. And self-defense doesn't happen by accident. You have to train for it. Accept the fact that it can happen.
To be prepared, like Roger said, if you want to have a handgun or a shotgun or anything in the home for self-defense, know how to use it. If you choose not to own a firearm, then make yourself aware of other opportunities and ways you can prevent being a victim.
Good set of track shoes helps. Randy?
Well, from a law enforcement perspective, the police aren't going to be there in 30 seconds when you need them in that critical moment. So it falls to you to protect yourself. And in that critical time, you have to make that decision and you have to live with that decision.
And I know what your advice is going to be, Alan. Call a lawyer.
Stay sober, and call your attorney after you shoot your weapon. That's all I can tell
It's
you.
just that simple. Hey, we thank you very much for tuning in. We will be here in this same time slot every week. I appreciate you looking in, and please tell your friends we're here on Fired Up. Thank you.